absence of justice. Why couldn't these wars simply be stopped? Why was there no judge, no court, no neutral authority to say, enough? The answer is that none existed. Pre-Islamic Arabia had no unified legal system. There was no state, no king with authority over all tribes, no court that could compel compliance. The nearest thing to law was tribal custom. And tribal custom was, by definition, written in favor of whoever held the most power. There were tribal arbiters, men called hakam, who could sometimes broker temporary truces. And occasionally pacts of mutual protection were formed. The most famous of these was Hilf al-Fudul, a rare pre-Islamic justice agreement in which several Meccan clans pledged to defend the rights of the oppressed, regardless of tribe. The young Muhammad, peace be upon him, participated in this pact and later said he would honor it even after Islam. That is how exceptional it was. But these were islands of reason in an ocean of chaos. For the vast majority of people, justice was whatever your tribe could enforce. If your tribe was strong, you had rights. If it was weak, you had none. A society without justice is not a society. It is simply a collection of armed groups waiting for the next spark. Superstition and spiritual collapse. We established that the Arabs were intellectually remarkable, sharp, observant, masters of memory and language. And yet, in matters of the spirit, they had collapsed into a darkness that defied all their intelligence. Fate in pre-Islamic Arabia was determined by birds. This was called tiara, the practice of reading omens from the flight of birds. If a bird flew to the right when you set out on a journey, it was a good sign. If it flew to the left, the journey was cursed and should be abandoned. Battles were postponed or launched based on the movement of a hawk. Marriages were called off because a crow flew the wrong direction. They also consulted the stars, not as astronomy, but as fortune-telling. And they visited kahana, soothsayers who claimed to communicate with spirits called jinn, muttering cryptic verses that people interpreted as divine guidance. These soothsayers were among the most powerful figures in society. Not warriors, not merchants, fortune-tellers. This was a people who could navigate by the stars for trade, but could not distinguish between science and superstition when their fears were involved. They had surrendered their rational faculty to terror of the unknown. And when superstition fills the space where faith should be, it does not bring peace, it brings more fear. Always more fear. The 360 idols of the Kaaba. Ibrahim alayhi salam built the Kaaba as a house of pure monotheism. By the time the 6th century arrived, that house contained 360 idols. Each tribe had placed its own god inside. These were not abstract beliefs. These were physical objects, carved from wood, stone, and precious metals, which people bowed before, sacrificed animals to, and carried into battle as divine protection. The three most revered were Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. Al-Lat was worshipped at Ta'if, a goddess of stone so sacred that her custodians grew wealthy from the offerings left at her feet. Al-Uzza was worshipped near Mecca. Associated with the morning star, she received blood sacrifices of camels, and sometimes more. Manat stood on the coast, where pilgrims would come and shave their heads in her honor before traveling to Mecca. Most shockingly of all, these three goddesses were referred to as Banat Allah, the daughters of God. The Arabs simultaneously claimed to believe in Allah as the supreme creator, and yet assigned him daughters made of stone. The theological contradiction was total. The house that Ibrahim built for the worship of one God had become, in the most literal sense, a marketplace of false deities. The sacred had been hollowed out. The divine had been replaced with the decorative. The condition of women. If there is one practice that summarizes the moral depth to which pre-Islamic Arabia had fallen, it is this. When a daughter was born, a man's face would darken, not with grief, but with shame. The Quran would later capture this moment with devastating precision. His face becomes dark, filled with grief. He hides himself from the people because of the evil news he has received. Should he keep her in contempt or bury her in the dust? Surah An-Nahl 58-59. And many chose to bury her, alive, in the sand. Their own daughters, their own flesh and blood, deemed worthless simply for being female. Historical accounts record men who buried multiple daughters with their own hands over the course of their lives. This was not a rare aberration. It was a culturally accepted practice rooted in the belief that a daughter would one day become a man's dishonor if she were captured, taken, or unable to fight. Beyond infanticide, women who survived fared little better. They could be inherited as property when a husband died. They had no right to inheritance. They could be bought and sold. Their testimony held no weight. Their consent was irrelevant. This was the world that women were born into. And this, more than any other single injustice, would be among the first things that the coming change would address. The trade paradox. Here is the great contradiction of pre-Islamic Arabia that history rarely emphasizes enough. At the same time that daughters were being buried in the sand, the Quraysh of Mecca were running one of the most sophisticated commercial networks in the ancient world. Twice a year, their great trade caravans departed Mecca. In winter, they traveled south to Yemen, connecting with Indian Ocean trade routes that brought spices, silk, and ivory from East Africa, India, and beyond. In summer, they traveled north to Syria, to the markets of Gaza and the edges of the Byzantine Empire, returning with grain, olive oil, and luxury goods. The Quran itself references these journeys. For the accustomed security of the Quraysh, their accustomed security in the winter and summer journey. These were not simple merchants. They were international financiers. They extended credit across hundreds of miles. They formed commercial partnerships between tribes that were simultaneously at war with each other. They understood compound interest, trade agreements, and diplomatic immunity. Mecca's market, protected by the sanctity of the Kaaba, was one of the few places in Arabia where all violence was temporarily suspended. Enemies traded side by side, a society capable of suspending war for commerce, but not for justice. That is the paradox. And it is a paradox that should make us think about our own world too. Poetry, pride, and darkness. The Arabs did not just fight, they sang about it. Pre-Islamic poetry, known as Shir al-Jahiliyyah, was among the most sophisticated literary tradition of the ancient world. Every year, at the great market of Okaz near Mecca, tribes gathered to compete, not just in commerce but in verse. The finest poems were written in gold ink on fine cloth and hung on the walls of the Kaaba, a practice so revered it gave these masterworks their name, al-Mu'allaqat. The suspended poems. The greatest poets of this era, Imru al-Qais, Tarafa ibn al-Abd, Antarah ibn Shaddad, Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, were considered national heroes. Antara was a warrior slave who won his freedom through the power of his verse. Imru al-Qais, called the Vagabond King, wrote love poetry so vivid it was still being memorized 1,000 years later. And yet, what did they write about? Primarily pride, revenge, tribal glory, wine, and longing. The themes of their poetry mapped perfectly onto the diseases of their society. They celebrated the very values that were tearing them apart. It is one of history's most haunting contradictions, a civilization sensitive enough to craft transcendent beauty, yet too proud to practice basic mercy. They could feel everything, but they had built a world that rewarded cruelty over compassion. Every time,